A very warm welcome tonight here in this beautiful room. My name is Christian Sim, I'm the CEO of Swissnex here in Boston, and I want to share a little story with you. If you have an apple and you share it with your neighbor, what happens? You have only half apple left. Once you have eaten the apple, there's really not much left except that you have a full stomach. Now, if you do the same with an idea, then you're two people having an idea, and you still have it, and you can grow it, you can make something out of it. That's pretty much one of the ideas that is behind what Swissnex is and does. We want to create meaningful conversations on important subjects with people from all types, all colors, all backgrounds, all countries in the world, even if we can. Meaningful conversations that help us advance science, higher education, innovation, and arts as a language that helps us understand the things that we look at, which is things we don't know how to explain yet most of the time. So that's what we do, and we do that in many cases with many partners. One of them being, for tonight in particular, Swiss Touch. Swiss Touch is an event series that basically pushes Swiss innovation and creative ideas forward. So it's several things at once. It's an event, it's social media, but it's also a physical table here. Why a table? Where do you have the most interesting conversations, if you think about it? It's maybe on a sofa, but we didn't want the sofa. So we set a table. And it's a table made out of wood from the Swiss mountains. And so the idea is that this table travels all around the US, and it highlights Swiss innovation thanks to prominent Swiss and American stakeholders. And we choose compelling topics and very unusual locations like this place here. And so with that, I may hand over the microphone to my colleague Jonas, who is the mastermind, or one of the masterminds in the team of Swissnex for the event tonight, and he will explain you everything else. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. So, I like to say that what we do is we try to engineer serendipity. And I think in my 4 years at Swissnex, what brings us here tonight is perhaps the most successful work in progress yet that I have had the fortune of participating in. So we care about forward-thinking, future-making ideas that capture the imagination, but we're also very much grounded in humanism. And I think that what brings us here tonight very much reflects these values that we have at Swissnex. And so we're here tonight because of a collaboration between the University of Lausanne and the MIT Future Heritage Lab that initiated about 1.5 years ago when we serendipitously introduced Azra and Patrick. And here we are now, 1.5 years later, talking about a much deeper, much more profound collaboration. And I don't want to spoil more about what it is that they'll be talking about because you'll obviously get to hear it from them. But I do want to thank the University of Lausanne, the foundation of the University of Lausanne, the MIT Future Heritage Lab, New View Studio, the Innovation School in Central Square, whom you'll hear more about later tonight as well. And of course, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum for hosting us tonight. Before we get started, the hashtags for tonight's event are Heritage in Peril and Swiss Touch, if you want to be active on social media. Please make sure that you silence your devices. And next up, I would like Rania Abouzeid to join me up on stage. She will be moderating tonight's event and kicking us off formally. Rania is a journalist and author who is currently spending a year at Harvard as a Nieman Fellow and has recently written a book on the conflict in Syria. And so we're very grateful to her to join us tonight to frame this conversation. So Rania, the floor is yours, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here with you this evening to talk about a subject that I have seen firsthand in my reporting from the Middle East, the heritage in Peril. It is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers, ladies first, and Ms. Azra Akšamija is an associate professor. She is an artist and an architectural historian, and she is also the director of the MIT Future Heritage Lab. And we also have Mr. Patrick Michel, who had a little bit further to travel. He joins us from the University of Lausanne, where he is a senior researcher and an archaeologist. And I'd like to invite Patrick Michel up to the podium to share with us his work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank you all to be here, and thanks Swissnex and Swiss Touch to help me to share tonight my perspective about the great archaeologist and his work, the work of Paul Collart, and about our safeguarding and 3D modeling project held at the University of Lausanne. I also would like to thank Azra in the Future Heritage Lab for our great collaboration in the fantastic workshop we had today at Nouveau, and of course Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum for hosting us. It's a great pleasure. So Palmyra is an ancient archaeological site in modern-day Syria. It was situated on the road between the Mediterranean Sea and Asia. It's the reason why it became a major trading post on the Silk Road. So being a crossroad, the culture of Palmyra is a mixed culture and future a multicultural society. The architecture is indeed a combination of Greco-Roman styles with Persian and Arab elements. The cultural significance of the site is then very important. So why it is an important cultural heritage? The combination of different influences in the architecture and the art of Palmyra gave birth to a characteristic art of Palmyra known as Palmyrian art. This art is especially recognizable in the funerary art, and you have here one example, where vertical tombs were closed and covered by stone slabs bearing the reliefs of a dead woman, man, or child. The portraits were composed as rich representation of human beings with jewelries, both for men and women, and precious cloth. In order to give the best image of it, the stone slabs were also painted. So UNESCO considers the site of Palmyra as bearing an outstanding universal value. During the Civil War, which began in 2011, the so-called Islamic State, or ISIS, took control of the region surrounding Palmyra and declared it part of the Caliphate, or state under Islamic rule. In 2015, media reports suggested that ISIS militants had destroyed several important statues at Palmyra. A few months later, they reportedly destroyed the remains of the Temple of Baal before tearing down the ruins of the inner chamber of the Temple of Bel throughout the walls and the entrance of the theater and the Tetrapylon. So, about the Baal sanctuary. So the sanctuary was excavated by the Swiss archaeologist Paul Collart between 1954 and 1956. And the archive of Paul Collart is kept at the University of Lausanne. Since the sanctuary destruction by ISIS on August 2015, this archive became the most important and the most complete documentation able to keep the memory of the monument alive and to ensure further investigation and to allow 3D modeling and to help consider the monument's reconstruction or restoration on site, which is still a highly debated question. Why is an archaeological archive so important? The importance of archives for archaeological research and field practice is undisputed in present-day archaeology. The broad definition of an archive could be archaeological records, including documents, finds, and museum collections. Archives are essential for history and archaeology. The process of archiving is one of the most important features of archaeology, even if it has been common practice to separate documents and artifacts collection when archiving, when they should in fact be included in the archive together. This greatly impacts anyone who studied the past of a peculiar site, biography of an archaeologist, or the history of archaeology in general. In addition, the archive can work as a resource connecting the past, present, and future of our discipline. Archive can also provide a starting point for research project. Archive should represent a prime research and a heritage asset. In the case of Palmyra, after the destruction of monuments and the pillage of the local museum, the archive, including photographs, drawings, plans, and inventories, are the only remain in order to keep the cultural memory of the monument, but also to estimate the feasibility of reconstruction. Another very important element is how an archaeological archive can help fighting against the illicit trafficking of cultural goods. After the theft in a museum or on an archaeological site, as you can see here, the inventories and the pictures produced by the archaeologists will remain as last proof for the artifacts are being part of a national collection. When the heritage is at risk, working on an archive can give the possibility to preserve it and to find a way to pass it on for further generations. Working on textiles and designs in ancient Palmyra, for example, gave us the possibility to recall the multicultural background of the ancient city of Palmyra and should participate to reinforce the community cohesion and sustained peace. So the archive of Paul Collart, where is it? Is composed by a lot of different documents, pictures, notebooks, sketch, and plans. So we have more than 8,000 documents, and we are now working on that archive. I would like to begin by just recalling the circumstances that pushed Paul Collart to manage the first Swiss archaeological expedition outside the national borders. First of all, in 1938, it was Henri Seyrig here that asked Paul Collart to work in Baalbek in Lebanon. And then he was assigned by UNESCO to establishing the inventory of cultural goods of Syria and Lebanon in 1954. And the very same year he began his work in the Baal Shemin temple. So the Baal Shemin temple or sanctuary is located to the north of the ancient city, and it is dedicated to the god of the skies. Baal Shemin means god of the skies. The god's character is known through epigraphic evidence, calling him a supreme god. And in Greek, his name is attested under Zeus Hypsistos. So as a master of the world, he also governs the sun and the moon, as can be seen in the iconography. As a master of sky, he is depicted as an eagle with wide open wings, governing the heavenly body. Furthermore, he is the god who gives rain and guarantees harvest. The lightning he brandishes in his hand is not a representation of terrifying power, but a reminder of the fertile rain which accompanies a storm, which makes the desert green again and prevents the springs from running dry. So in the region like Palmyra, where the economy is fundamentally based on caravans, he also guarantees protection from dryness to the people, cattle raisers, and cultivators. He is also worshipped as an agrarian god, symbolized by the bouquet made of corn ears, fruits, and grapes that he wears. So the whole sanctuary consists of 3 different courtyards. So you have here what was the temple, and 1, 2, 3 courtyards, and a banquet room, and also a tomb that dates back to the 2nd century BC. Then the temple was built in the 1st and 2nd century AD, and then all this area was reused during the Byzantine and the Islamic period. So here, the greatest job of Paul Collart was that he recognized among here the late Byzantine structure with our spolia that you see here, the element of the thalamus, I mean the inner chamber of the chapel that you have here. So he was able, with Syrian and Swiss architects and archaeologists, to rebuild the whole inner part of the cella. After the excavation that ended in 1956, Paul Collart became the director of the Swiss Institute in Rome, and he availed himself of his residency in Rome to publish the result of the Syrian research in the collection of the Swiss Institute. After the death of Paul Collart in 1981, his heirs donated to the University of Lausanne all their father's pictures and documents. So our project. After the destruction in Palmyra, the problem we face today is the documentation of the monument itself, but also the documentation of its destruction, but also the feasibility of a restoration or reconstruction and the possibility of new archaeological research. To address the problem, the project at the University of Lausanne aims to publish all the documentation produced by the Collart archive team and make it accessible to Syrian authorities and researchers around the world. This project is a unique occasion to realize the value of an archive. We do not produce new data, but publish and make accessible useful information on a destroyed monument. Our archive contains unique documentation of Syrian heritage. And we also consider ethical questions on the meaning of our actions and the way we work involving local communities. The project enables the preparation of future action in the field, and the results have a practical utility with an impact that can be measured quickly. Members of our team in Lausanne digitize all the original documents, making them available on our online open access database. This database is called Tiresias, which consists of photos, sketchbooks, and notebooks in PDF format. Some of the available documents are still unpublished, and some have been used to produce a 3D model of the destroyed temple. So we use our archive, you see here the process, to produce the 3D model, but our work aimed to give a digital double of this destroyed temple throughout its history without choosing a specific period, and to allow further generation to keep the memory of the monument. So, can you launch the video, please? Here you have the results now of the digital double, and you see the high poly. This is more than 61 billion points that have been designed to do this replica, so there is no copy-paste. Single architectonic pieces have been drawn manually based on our documentation. So this work was done in collaboration with a French startup in Paris called Iconem. And in the project we also, Okay, so we plan to have a platform where the digital model, the 3D model you saw, will be integrated, and it will be geolocalized, and then you can choose a point of interest. If you want to see this inscription, for example, and then you will be able to click on the number, and then you have all the information, the metadata linked to this element that will appear on the screen. I'm sorry, it doesn't appear, okay. Another very important point is that our model is chronological, so we don't only produce in 3D the model of the temple that you saw, but we begin with the funerary tomb element that you have here that dates back to the 2nd century BC, and we go to the Islamic period, and so you will be able to see the evolution of the volumetry of the different walls in every single period. So it's a way not to keep only the memory of the monument as it was during the Greco-Roman period, but to really keep the memories and identities through time without having to choose. And the last point in this project, which is also very important, is to be able to produce, using the object ID system, an inventory of every single pieces excavated by the Swiss team in Palmyra, and then to compare this inventory with the inventories that are done now in Damascus by our Syrian colleagues in order to give the information of the missing pieces to Interpol. And this work is very useful because if you think that was the museum and it was before ISIS, and this is how the museum was after ISIS, and now the museum is totally cleaned. All the archaeological pieces are safely stored or in Beirut or in Damascus, but we still don't know what exactly disappeared, so comparing the inventories between Swiss and Syria will help knowing what is or could be missing. A few more words about the valorization of this project. As I said, we work with the French startup Econem, and we recently participated in the Age-Old Cities exhibition at Institut du Monde Arabe in Paris. This exhibition is now in Bonn, in Germany, and you may be happy to know that it will come to Washington at the end of this year, so you will have the possibility to just go and see it. So this is it's an immersive exhibition, and it was it gave us the possibility for the first time to show the people, the work we did for the 3D modeling. So there are absolutely no artifacts, no documents. This is an immersive experience, and we also created, in collaboration with Ubisoft, a VR experience for that. And this is what the people were able. This is a video, please. Okay. So this is a photogrammetry of the site today, the destroyed temple, and people are able then to see in transparency the 3D model of the temple, and we use this no texture just in order to be able to see the inner part of the temple, but also to keep in mind the destruction around. So it's like a collage with two different states of conservation or non-conservation of the Bastian temple. On the other hand, we have to keep in mind that the 3D model is produced very far from the local communities, and that the way chosen to keep cultural memory of the monument is paradoxically a way of dematerialization, because virtual is indeed no material reality. Furthermore, we consider as most relevant to evaluate the social impact of our work with local communities. We therefore aim to investigate the mobility of memory in digital heritage reconstruction, as well as questions of the authentic transmission of memory via digital objects. The global crisis in human migration and displacement due to war, climate, and poverty has accompanied a rise in material and immaterial cultural heritage destruction. This situation has driven the urgency to deploy digital imaging and modeling as a means to preserve both historic monuments and objects, not only for preservation agendas, but also as touchstones for the collective memories associated with them. Despite the genuine potential of virtual models to be used as part of humanitarian action for displaced people or for artistic avenues, they are nonetheless assets available for exploitation, in some cases serving economic, nationalistic, or even neo-colonial agendas. So in this project, we also translate into Arabic summaries of our activities and produce an Arabic booklet about the history of Palmyra. In collaboration with the MIT Future Heritage Lab, we hope to provide camps in Jordan with this booklet and tells the story of Palmyra with emphasis on the multicultural aspects of the city during antiquity. We also participate in creative action that aim to create future heritage. This is a crucial point in the education for the next generations. Life in the camps is more than difficult, and people are facing difficulties in finding occupation. That is the reason why we would like to participate in providing a space in which culture could be expressed. Dealing with the issue of conservation of cultural memory with the Future Heritage Lab, we came to the idea of linking intangible and tangible cultural heritage together. As stated by Azra, embroidery patterns depict personal history of migration and creation process which facilitate transcultural exchange. End of quote. Furthermore, textiles represent an iconographic and ornamental expression of their respective civilization. In the case of Palmyra, we decided to use ornamental designs from the now destroyed Bastian temple to produce embroidery patterns. This idea was also supported by the fact that in Palmyra tombs, silk and wool textiles have been found. Silk textile came from China, but wool textiles were produced and decorated locally during antiquity. The motifs designed on this textile have recently been studied, and I was really amazed to discover that the iconographic repertoire of motifs in antique Palmyra was the same for architecture and for textile. Indeed, the same model were used for the creation of architectural ornaments as well as of the representation of textile models on sculptures and for the production of original fabric models. Palmyra has also shown, and this is really interesting, that the transfer of models was made from textile art to stone carving and architecture and not the way around. We therefore produce models and canvas that will be used for embroideries in the camps. The use of these patterns will give birth to activities taking into account tangible and intangible heritage. It will put together the heritage value of the Bastian temple as part of the common past of Syria with the local tradition of embroidery. From Central Asia to Northern Africa, the practical dealings and discourses of textile tradition are used in process of nation building and in the quest for an identity. We should also underline the fact that textile traditions are considered as national emblems. Today's memory of the different textile handicrafts take traditional symbolism serious and includes the formal ritualistic meanings of technical procedures. It is possible through a process of transformation where contemporary fashion design attempts to find a modern design vocabulary for traditional designs. Producing embroidery is a way of performing cultural heritage and to underline the multicultural fashion inspirations in present Syria. Today, there is no common approach to peace and to peace in Syria. The international community as well as the internal actors are divided on what peace means and how to get there, and the means to support peace in Syria have been mainly of political or military nature. That's also the reason why we joined the UNDP program. The framework concept of sustaining peace defined by the UN Security Council and General Assembly refers to a goal and process to build a common vision of a society, ensuring the needs of all segments of the population are taken into account, which encompasses activities aimed to preventing the outbreak, escalation, continuation, and recurrence of conflict, addressing root causes, assisting parties to conflict to end hostilities, ensuring national reconciliation, and moving toward recovery, reconstruction, and development. In the aftermath of internal or external crisis, the social pact between a state and its citizens is weakened, and therefore we would need to be redefined and readjusted to the new situation in order to reinforce the community cohesion and sustain peace. UNDP Syria is determined to follow a strict conflict sensitivity approach while planning and implementing for any activities. This approach is known as dealing with the past and is considered to be an essential basis for a peaceful society and aims at establishing a culture of accountability, rule of law, and reconciliation. Based on a careful review from detailed local context analysis produced by UNDP teams in Damascus and Aleppo, UNDP Syria will minimize unintended negative impacts while reinforcing peace building and social cohesion at local level. The use of educational tools and embroidery patterns in the Collart Palmyra project will be a very humble but meaningful part of the reconstruction of the social cohesion. I do thank you for your attention.
Hi everyone, my name is Azra Akšamija. Let me just start Okay. So I originate from Bosnia and Herzegovina and have been living in different places across the world and came to US in 2002. Have been at MIT for a very long time. In 2016, have founded the Future Heritage Lab, and I'm really pleased to be here and start this collaboration. I would like to thank Swissnex to introducing me to Patrick and supporting our work. The work of Collart and our colleagues at the University of Lausanne meets fertile ground at MIT, where a number of my colleagues and I are working on either new approaches to addressing displacement, or on the other hand, addressing the humongous scale of destruction as it's still taking place in many places around the world. So I would like to acknowledge an initiative that is currently being in formation called Transpreservation Initiative that includes people from 5 different schools, professors like Admir Masic, who is here with us in the audience, and his initiative REACT that works on refugee education, to history theory criticism program, Professor Mark Yarzonbeck, Professor Nasser Abad, and the Aga Khan program, people who work both on Middle East, but also kind of global perspectives on cultural heritage, to the work of engineers in D-Lab and people who have long established practice in kind of ethical approaches to refugee education or working in zones of conflict and crisis. Today I will talk about our work, the Future Heritage Lab, that has been operating in Jordan for 3 years now. What we do is to connect really the concerns of heritage preservation and the destruction that is ongoing with the future of people whose heritage has been destroyed, like Syrian refugees living all across the world. Specifically in Jordan, we found a base. What will be the future of these kids growing up in these huts under the bare sun, under the sand? Of course, we should acknowledge that the history of kind of destruction of heritage has been a long one. What is new, and this is where I'm working through the lens of art and artistic approaches to heritage preservation, is to raise awareness about the kind of recent shifts in the way the destruction is instrumentalized for political purposes as a weapon of war. So, from my own home country, Bosnia and Herzegovina, you see the image on the right, Sarajevo book burning. Andras Riedelmeier, one of my mentors at Harvard, has called the largest single incident of book burning in the modern history. That was targeted purposely by fire grenades, and when people built human chains to rescue the books from burning, they were hit by snipers to prevent firefighting operations. These kinds of destructions are not mere kind of collateral damage of destruction. We are talking about use of heritage as a weapon of war. So I will erase your library, your mosque, your church, your synagogue, we know it from the Second World War, your gravestones, to erase the traces that not only one particular ethnic group has lived in a certain region, but as in the case of Bosnia, for example, that coexistence was also even possible. And the way people nowadays use the destruction is also, in combination with the torture, is to alienate the people to the extent that they never want to live together in the future. This was what was happening in Bosnia, it is happening in Syria, it is happening in Yemen right now. So I just want to make that point. And in this context, we have to find, I think, a new language in which that we can use to talk about the destruction. When Palmyra arch that I blended in the beginning was destroyed, the whole world was outraged, and the images of the destruction were circulating all around the media. But we have to step back and ask ourselves, is my Facebook activism really the right one, and is whose hand am I playing into? These images of destruction, in many cases, were produced for our consumption. The Palmyra Arch was carefully choreographed, the destruction of it, the planting of explosives, the blowing up with the stones afterwards. All of this shock was produced for our kind of multiplication of images, and it's used in social media to be outraged, and through that kind of enhance actually the effect of the destruction in the hands of ISIS. So as an artist, I asked myself, okay, how do we talk about this destruction without the use of these images, and is it ethical to use them? So to talk about certain difficult questions like this, I launched a project called Memory Matrix in 2016 when MIT was celebrating 100th anniversary of its old campus move from Boston to MIT, and there was this question, okay, we are celebrating our heritage, but like the world is being bombed. How are we talking about this? Our department is having 150th anniversary. So we need to acknowledge that. And so I created together with my students, and then later up to 700 participants, this traveling piece that's called Memory Matrix, a scaffolding. It looks like a stage, a kind of monument in a constant process of construction and destruction. That shows you fragmentary images of Palmyra Arch. Only when you're kind of looking straight to it, you would see the outline. And it's this shimmering image of like a digital physical installation is made up by 20,000 little plastic pixels that I will show in a bit. So to, kind of reflect in this fragment spectacle, the idea of we need a new visual vocabulary to talk about destruction. The other way this project is trying to kind of call attention to is the selective empathy we might have, and how might we work with that when we think about the destruction. When this Palmyra was destroyed, the whole world was outraged, but when Umayyad Mosque was destroyed, not so much coverage was there. And why is that so? How do we decide and get to decide that certain monuments are more important to us or have more resonance in our audience? I think we can maybe, because Palmyra has such a transcultural history, affiliate and see ourselves more in it. But that is something that maybe we can work with to kind of connect and really care from distant part of the world to those places that are far away. So with my students, when we were designing this project, this was exactly the method to kind of get them interested and to relate to Palmyra. The distant place and distant time was to draw patterns and artifacts and monuments, components of cultural heritage that relate somehow to their family history or their identity. So one example is a student whose family survived the Holocaust, and so she drew the outline of the synagogue in Munich as a kind of link to her personal path and being a survivor in a third generation of that history. And those pixels are hung on chain link fencing, reminiscent of like keychains and all these keys of the homeless people or people who lost their history, memory, and identity in Syria. The project kept traveling to different places, so this kind of physical making of the thing was actually a vehicle to bring students together and to start these conversations. From International Academy of Art in Palestine to Cairo Maker Fair to MIT classes, Jordan Amman Design Week, and so on, where students were designing these outlines and sharing their stories with each other, oftentimes across generations. Now, in these discussions, it is important for me to also ask the question, what is being restored and how useful is technology in this? Right now, we are witnessing a kind of trend. A lot of us in the West, we want to help. We have the means, we have the tools, we have the technology, especially we at MIT have a lot of ideas how we could use the technology. But just because we own these technologies, shall we use them? Who is to use them? And what about the local expertise of people in Syria, in the Middle East? How to avoid colonial approaches. So here you see one example of an attempt to kind of 3D print fragments of Palmyra arch in a model that was showcased as a celebration of technology's capacity to reconstruct what was destroyed almost instantly as the destruction takes place. But you have to ask yourself, what does it mean to carry around this replica of the arch in places of colonial power, from London to Dubai to New York? For whom is this reconstruction made? And how do we position ourselves in that? So for me, I think we can use technology. That was a decision as an artist to make, was to use it as a form of knowledge transfers, maybe between generations, maybe across borders. So, designing these different outlines and sharing these stories and documenting is a way of making that connection, but not necessarily substituting. What is being distorted is a question we are getting asked now as the discussion about how do we approach reconstruction in Syria are becoming pertinent. In the case of Palmyra, what does it mean, for example, to restore a ruin to another state of ruin? Do we go back to the 3rd century of the Severus Septimus emperor? Do we go to the 19th century restorations of the Palmyra city? Do we go to, how about that layer of meaning that was inflicted on the ruin at the moment of destruction? Is it not worth also, and is it not part of the story of that place? So the materiality and non-materiality of that memory is a kind of difficult question to be asked. From my own perspective, I think it is not enough just to think about the material value of heritage. This is the famous Mostar Bridge in Bosnia, a pearl of the 16th century Ottoman architecture that was destroyed during the war and then restored in a really complex project, fishing the original stones from the river, 3D fragments being positioned exactly where they are. Wonderful, successful material reconstruction, but without social repercussion. This is a city where Muslim and Croat inhabitants live on different sides of the river. The kids go to school in the morning, the ones learn this part of the history, like 2 versions of the same history, basically. So it is a missed opportunity, I think, that in the process of such a symbolic monument, the bridge, that was so poignant in terms of, destruction of our coexistence, that we didn't use this process to also try to restore that coexistence. So the Memory Matrix project, for example, talks about these issues. How do we think about preservation in terms of borders being erected against refugees? In my own history of war, whole Europe was open to welcome Bosnian refugees. Now Europe is closing their doors to the Syrian refugees. That project kind of opens that kind of wall into a space that you can pass through and contemplate and think about borders. Now, that project generated both publicity and some funding for us to then go and say, okay, where do we place our agency as educational institutions, as artists, as a bunch of interested and enthusiastic students, and how can we, what can we do? So I went to Jordan. In Jordan, MIT has, through the Mystic Arab World Program, possibility for people to collaborate with faculty and get also support, institutional. And I went to Al-Azraq refugee camp. It is a camp in the middle of nowhere on the border to Saudi Arabia, in a desert, not a single tree there. 35,000 Syrian refugees from at least 5 different cities, so scrambled from all over the place, live in a kind of legal and time vacuum. Everyone is given this kind of shelter, and this is state-of-the-art of humanitarian aid. It's a really well-run, actually, camp, super well-organized, but planned according to principles of engineering and a kind of infrastructural optimization. And so, while shelter is provided to you and you get food and crime is relatively well contained, human trafficking and all these problems, emotional and cultural needs are barely addressed. And this is where these kinds of images that we took in 2017 in a photography workshop that we had in the camp were just stunning. You encounter a kind of mud replica of Palmyra Arch in this refugee camp of Azra, where a guy was stealing cement for like over half a year to build this little Palmyra Arch as a kind of cultural shelter in front of his steel shelter. For me, this is such a powerful image of telling us, what is actually a shelter, that it's not just a roof above your head, but also your history, your memory, your identity, place where you come from. There's no reason for him, any functional reason, to make something like this. So we go to these camps in Jordan to learn from the people, document the way they humanize humanitarian aid in this area of ontological deprivation, and also to kind of develop from the perspective of contemporary art and socially engaged practice methods that maybe could be useful for other fields. And you can learn a lot from the refugees. So in Zatari camp, for example, a group of men organized themselves in a kind of future heritage setup. They are building monuments from the regions where they come from. They teach the kids, they build them out of mud and kebab sticks, whatever is available. Partly it's trauma therapy, personal, partly it's about sharing knowledge. But then also from artists like Mohsin Alehari, a Iranian artist who is doing this 3D printing of artifacts on a different scale of what ISIS has destroyed, but embedding in these artifacts memory sticks with information about what was lost and the erasure itself, which I found quite a provocative and interesting way to think about where is the value and the authenticity of heritage, right? Is it in the material, in the information? How does that stuff circulate? Is this a cheap tourist artifact? What is it exactly? So now, from this perspective, I want to show you a kind of a project that illustrates what I call a performative preservation, an approach to cultural preservation through the lens of contemporary art that uses components of heritage, but kind of reinterpretation and co-creation across borders, across disciplines to kind of create something valuable for the future. So this project is called Light Weaver, and it is a lamp that weaves light three-dimensionally and can allow you to transform your shelter into a kind of immersive cultural environment. It's inspired by Arabic lantern and kind of the traditions of light, but also light being a symbol of hope and, so I mean, religiously speaking, one of the names of God. And then, you can use this lamp in many, or see it in many different ways. It could be a sculpture, it could be a preservationist device. It is a useful device to kind of transform your shelter, an educational device. We worked with a collection from Metropolitan Museum that has a lot of both artifacts and textiles from the region, translated embroidery patterns into patterns that are looking like punch cards of the jacquard loom, and using really local tools. So it's about the kind of context-sensitive design when you work with this. It's easy to laser cut these things, but how do you work in a place of absolute scarcity? So, We used trash, food packaging. The engineers in the camp helped us figure out how to create this gear mechanism out of cardboard. And here you see a kebab, the nargile for the water pipes, tobacco, the punchers that I used to create the punches for the light. So we invent tools, processes, and co-creations. So it's important, in terms of ethics of working in this kind of environment, that it's not just us coming to kind of teach something, but it's a situation in which everyone is teaching and learning something. So there are groups from Syrian refugee community from the camp, Jordanian and Palestinian people from Jordan, the host community, and then international students work together, and it's a multi-directional knowledge exchange. Also multi-generational. It's important that the grandmother can actually bring you much more important things than maybe I could say about these patterns. Can we have the video of one of these? And you see the finished result is this lamp. Patterns ranged from calligraphy to maybe this one as well. You see how the weaving. Super. So this kind of works informs what we are trying to do with the University of Lausanne and the Collart Archive. Patrick prepared a wonderful booklet with the information both about Palmyra, adjusted for high school students, translated in Arabic, that talks about ornaments and Palmyra city. We took this merlon. It is a motif from the top of the temple that is representing a kind of connection of this sphere with the sky. And we are translating this motif into embroidery patterns. So I will show you one kind of, this is just like work in progress, beginning of this. Today we were hosted by Nuvu Studio, a wonderful school in Cambridge that is working also on innovative approaches to high school education using technology in publication. Okay. So what we prepared for the students was a quarter of this. So it's a tablecloth, but a quarter of a tablecloth. So two students work across from each other and they have to negotiate the patterns. So in this area, they are creating their own patterns to share their own story. And they have to kind of visually and in terms of storytelling negotiate it with this part. So we have like 3 or 4 hours time to produce something and test it. Maybe Rosa, you would like to come and share some thoughts about today. How it all. And tell us first about the new, because I don't think I did justice in presenting you guys.
Hello everybody, my name is Rosa Weinberg and I'm a senior coach and the director of studio development at New View Studio. New View is a very alternative high school it's a high school and middle school. We've been around for about 10 years and we're located in Central Square in Cambridge. Students come to us from one of our partner schools, which is Beaver Country Day, and then half of our students come to us from other types of educational backgrounds. We are based on the architectural studio methodology. So one of New View's co-founders did his PhD on teaching the architectural studio model as a way of teaching creative problem solving to middle and high school students. His name is Saeed Arida, and he is Syrian, and he and Azra became friends when they were at MIT. That's true, right? And we do a lot of design studios based in the real world, and we love doing workshops with people like Azra, with practitioners. It's a really great experience for our students to be exposed to the world outside of our school.
Maybe we can show the piece of Arvin.
Avin? Yeah. Is this it?
Yeah. So we did the same process of punching, first designing the patterns, and we asked the students to bring artifacts and something that they would relate to heritage and their own identity and the kind of experience of migration. And Arina made this pattern, so they were asked first to draw them in conversation with the Palmyra pattern and then punch them. And we will digitize these and then laser cut them, and this whole project will travel. And this is what he wrote about this. So every year, my grandparents in India sent an article of clothing for me and my sister. And I was 10, I received an ornate suit jacket from them. I was inspired by the patterns to make this piece symbolic of peace. So it's something, grandparents across the continent sending him textiles to kind of keep the memory of his place of origin alive, and he translated that pattern that we saw today. It's not yet laser cut, it takes some time to do this, but we see this as a kind of blueprint of something that can travel, but then it can be multiplied and take different forms. The next step for this is to build a kind of educational workshop material that can be replicated and used in different places, and then actually do these workshops in the camps, disseminate the material from Collart Archive and this educational programming. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for a sobering but also very hopeful presentation. We don't have too much time, and I really do want it to be very dynamic. I'm sure that you have lots of questions, so I won't take up too much time with our speakers, but I did want to start with Azra. You gave us a very detailed presentation, including some of the thinking behind the project that you're doing, bearing in mind your own personal experience with war and refugees and the history of these places that have often been scarred by outsiders coming in to do their own thing, and colonial representations of art and other people's history. I wanted to ask you about some of the things that you're specifically thinking about when it comes to this project in Syria. You know, when you talk about Syria, the conflict isn't over yet. You have to think about, you're engaging Syrians, but which Syrians do you engage? Has there been outreach to Syrians in other communities that are outside of Jordan, for example, in government-held areas? And if just more broadly, some of the things that you're thinking about when it comes to implementing a project in a place that is not yet post-conflict.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of... Okay, so I'm thinking about this in various ways. So one dimension of our work is about the kind of ethics of encounter and coming in as a Westerner from here to these places, and what are we doing there, what can we ultimately do, right? Because I'm not a humanitarian agency, I'm one artist and teaching at this university. So after many years of ethical kind of freeze and like, what are we doing, and discussions with the people, decided that the effects of our work could be threefold. One is a kind of research, site-specific in these zones, to uncover maybe failures of the system that someone with, or people across fields can have in conversation with one another. So in that sense, we are working to learn from refugees themselves. We're working on a book of refugee inventions, for example, with the people in the camp, that gives you perspective of what is missing, basically. They invent what is not provided. On the other one, outreach on a kind of broader scale to people both in Syria and in different regions through the Code of Ethics project that we are doing, that intends not to prescribe ethics but to invite people for conversations to share perspectives on what the intervention should be. And those range both from experts and non-experts in Syria, so different kind. I have no way of deciphering. Also, I operate only in this one zone because I didn't want to have this kind of in and out type of approach. It's important to build a community. For us, it was about building first collaboration with local university, German Jordanian University, and together going there with Arabic speakers, non-Arabic speakers, right? And then bringing both women and men. There are very diverse audiences, but I think for me, I don't want to dilute into too many areas. My colleagues at MIT, of course, as a group, we do operate in many different areas and have things that could engage people from Syria as well. But I think our work is specifically in the camps.
Patrick, I wanted to ask you, so you reminded us that archaeological sites are not static and that they are changing and they have changed. I wanted to ask you about if there are other collaborations, other groups of people who are also working on Palmyra in some form. You have this amazing resource with the archives, but are there other groups that are trying to do work in Palmyra, and if so, how is your collaboration with them? You're looking to virtually, and the other question I wanted to ask you was you're looking to virtually reconstruct the temple, but we know also from antiquity that when there were conquerors, the same stones were often used to rebuild other things. Is there any talk of actually physically rebuilding Palmyra?
So to answer the first question, of course there are people around the world working on Palmyra today. I will organize next December an international conference on Palmyra in Lausanne, and we invited people from around the world because there are a lot of people doing digital archaeology or databases like the Digital Library of the Middle East and the database of the DAI. And but what is different is that we decided to digitize and make accessible all the documentation we had. And what I noticed is that our French colleagues or our German colleagues or the Japanese or the Polish didn't really now begin to digitize the archive or to produce 3D models based on scientific documentation. So you have hundreds of different 3D models available on the internet, but the accuracy is very terrible. So one of the aim of the next conference will be just to inform people of what we do, the way we do it, to motivate people to also digitize their archive, to work and to try to interpret the scientific documentation. And maybe about the second question, I think we can say that there is a real wish to reconstruct Palmyra, but this is difficult. I mean, this is an issue. This is a real problem. What do we have to reconstruct and how? So in our project, we don't think of a material anastylosis reconstruction, but we gave the possibility to think about the feasibility of an anastylosis, because using the 3D model and being able to measure the remaining blocks on site and the state of conservation of it, it's possible just to give an information about how many new blocks we will have to produce. So this is an important thing, but the other point is that working on the 3D model through time gives the possibility to keep this memory through time. So if you just look at the Balshamin temple, Just as I said, in the 2nd century BC, you have a funerary monument, and then you have the temple. And then the temple is reused during the Byzantine period, and then all the courtyards are reused during the Islamic period. When Paul Collart came there, he dismantled totally all the Byzantine structure because he wanted to rebuild the inner chapel. So now, if we face the question of reconstruction, what do we have to reconstruct? I mean, do we have to think of the Byzantine state of the temple, or just the Greco-Roman, because this is what we as Western cultured people are more linked to? Or what about the Islamic workshop that they were in use in the courtyards? So I don't have the answer. What I just can say is that producing a 3D model which is diachronic and chronologic gives you the possibility to keep several memories and not to make a choice.
Thank you. We don't have too much time, so I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience, if anybody has a question. I think there are mics going around. There's a gentleman there.
Thank you very much for the fascinating presentation. My question is to Patrick, and just to follow with the discussion that has been just been going on about who will do that and when, not only how and these kinds of questions. And my question is related mainly to the issue of ethics and its relation to the authority. You used this term, authority, in your presentation, and in the discussion the word government appeared. And we know that Syrians are really negotiating political issues, and you used authority to avoid regime and to avoid government, obviously, because this is how it is used in literature. So my question is how do you see, how do you view the relationship between ethics and who will work on this? Globally speaking, many countries, European, American, are not dealing with a regime because of the ethical and non-ethical reasons. And what you have produced, as you have nicely explained, are so important and might be very powerful. So in which hands, which is an expression that you have used, in which hands will you put your data? And really, if you can summarize how powerful they could be.
I will try to summarize because there are several points and issues. First of all, as we work with public funding, all our material is in open access. So you can find everything that we produce on our website. So it could be used by anyone, any power, any regime, any whatever. So we don't have the control on that. This is the policy of the university. What we produce using public funding must be an open source. This is the first point. The second point is I've been working in Syria for 10 years. I'm half Lebanese myself, and I do remember meeting Mahmoud Abdul Karim when he was still the head of antiquities. And even if he was a member, he was hired by the government, he always said, we do archaeology, we work for heritage, and we don't do politics. I'm half Swiss, and I've got this chance to be normally neutral, and there is no scientific band between Switzerland and Syria. So yes, we share our documentation with the DGM, the DGAM, the Directorate of Antiquities in Syria, not specifically for the 3D modeling, but especially for the inventories, because another problem with Switzerland is that it was a big hub for illicit trafficking. Also, if we change now the national law about it, but we have a duty. We cannot keep all this information and not work with Syrian authorities to see what could be missing in the museum and what could be sold then in London or Geneva or New York. So this is more a feeling of duty. We have the possibility to do something, so we have to do it. And I don't really care about politics. I do really care about ethics. That's the reason why we try to involve local population and refugees in the work we do. That's also the reason why I invited people coming from Sierra for the next international conference. And the last point maybe to answer you is that all the things are framed by international conventions and that we really work hand in hand with UNESCO. So the next conference will be organized in collaboration with UNESCO. We have 2 days conference in Lausanne and then the last day to write the recommendation for Palmyra with the UNESCO in the office in Paris.
My name is Maria Ivanova. I'm on the faculty at UMass Boston. You just mentioned UNESCO, and my question relates to UNESCO. UNESCO has cultural heritage and natural heritage sites. I'm very intrigued by the concept of a future heritage lab. Both of you talked today about the cultural heritage and those sites. Have you thought about what happens to the natural heritage sites? How do they feature in your work? Are you thinking with them, engaging with them, and what happens when natural heritage sites are destroyed? Who wants to take it first?
Well, I mean, we're at the beginning of developing this work, so we haven't worked on natural heritage sites specifically, but they are part of these conversations and equally important. I think, for example, in the Memory Matrix project, one of the students developed a whole research project about destruction of Amazon and native cultures there, and a kind of that unwritten knowledge, but also the natural heritage, which is heritage and the future of all of us on the planet, right? Within this broader initiative of trans-preservation that we are developing at MIT, that question will be important in the point of cultural resilience and learning from practices of indigenous communities and from the past of how can we live more sustainably. It's still in the cooking, so I can't really give you a specific example, but thank you for posing that because it's a really important question.
I would have given the same answer.
Yes, sir. Microphone here, please. Second row.
After that first question for Professor Michel, which was admittedly a difficult question, here's a follow-up question for Professor Akšamija, and let's hope it's truly a hopeful question. As you work with the refugees in the camp, in particular in Jordan, do you see any signs of hope there that they are creating a freely appropriated sense of their own Syrian history, and that freely appropriated sense of Syrian history steps beyond the political, ethical nexus so that they can bear witness to a sense of what it would be to be a Syrian who says, this is my heritage, and this is how I'm going to build on it? Thank you.
Thank you for this question. Unfortunately, I would say no. I mean, I don't have the insight into the entire camp, but the population we have worked with is predominantly from rural sites, and then there is a generational gap. So you have the older people who are there and who have the knowledge of these sites, and there are a couple of educated people, but all of them move away because they are the ones who get resettled. So the uneducated people are usually the ones to stay. And some of them, they try to make themselves available and teach everyone. And the kind of folk traditions live, of course, across the generations, but we are not talking about knowledge exactly about history of Palmyra. It's more about, let's say, embroidery or this kind of living culture. The young generation, and that's on the other hand where we should be careful not to project some sense of authenticity of what is Syrian and not. The kids are looking at YouTube videos and they like Britney Spears and, I don't know, Shakira. And they wear jeans, and they are part of a global community. And so that's also to be considered and not to impose, so to say, our view what is important. But I think what you're doing is very important with this kind of multiple histories, multiple layers, not just one layer that we decide There is, yes, multi-layeredness and multicultural perspective on the site, which I think is important to keep. Its history is complicated, right? And we need that mess to keep that.
A question.
Yeah,
You're going to have to yell.
I'll try to project. In the absence of things to do at these camps by hand or the material being lacking, have you thought of integrating storytelling and poetry, which has been the most traditional and way of preserving memory?
Yes. So with, for example, the light weaver, we did that. We didn't know at the beginning that would be that important or interesting, because it was addressing like a young group of people, but because there was a number of older engineers as a part of the group, they started introducing poetry, and it was really beautiful how that started translating into the patterns and into the calligraphy. And so after realizing that part of this book of inventions is to have multiple perspectives. So one is the designerly perspective and the analysis of these things, where designer looks at this, let's learn from this context. And on the other hand, the poetic kind of walk through the camp, through the stories and poetry of people. So we have done workshops in creative writing and poetry that are going to be part of this. Couldn't show everything, but certainly important, and I think very important to have that view too.
Yes. In the front, please, microphone. I think this will have to be our last question.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. I have a question for Patrick, and since everything that we've talked about tonight is in a way disruptive to life in camps and to heritage, my question is really, what is the role of classical traditions like archaeology and these sort of more humanistic ways of looking at things informing technology?
Well, there is a paradox, because doing archaeology is also destroying things. The way we work imply the destruction of the object we study. But what is very important in this context is we also are, I think, the keeper of the memory, and our duty and role is to keep this memory and just to give it back to them. So this is maybe the best way we can face this problem.
I think also, if I may supplement, I think with that workshop today that we did, I think the work that you do also has meaning in, not just like in these camps, but here. We have a crisis in front of our door. We have xenophobia, Islamophobia, right? So learning from these historic sites is really important, and where this archive can
there is
be.
also an impact for our own society. So I didn't mention it here, but we also have now a project with school students in Switzerland that began exchanging postcards about cultural heritage between, thanks to UNDP, a class in Aleppo and some students in Switzerland. So it is also very important to teach our own young students about the importance of cultural heritage.
Thank you. I think that's a good note to end on, to remind everybody that this is our shared heritage and it is in peril. I'd like to invite everybody, actually, after we thank our guests, to the reception. So if you didn't get a wristband, if you could go to the reception and pick up one of those to join us for a reception after this event. But right now, if you would join me in thanking our speakers today for a very interesting